What's up, you guys? We are here for our Saturday night secret sermon. This is our weekly segment entitled Secret Teachings of Jesus. My oven has preheated. I come in from work and I open up the Gnostic Gospels and we read these together. I just had always really wanted to read the Nag Hammadi scriptures and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we're all feeling like we're running out of hours of the day, so many days. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if we made this a regular weekly segment? So this is one of my favorite things that we do all week. And tonight is going to be a part 2 of last week's episode. So last week we read the passage from the Gospel of Philip called Creation Through a Mistake. So if you haven't already seen that episode, I would highly suggest you go pause this and go back and watch that one, because we really went into depth and set the foundation in that episode. But it was one of those times where after I got in the shower, I started thinking about it. I was like, oh, there were things that I should have said, but I don't like to make these longer than an hour. So usually they're right about 45 minutes or so, but maybe we'll get out a little bit shorter this time. I finally found the Bible version of the Bible that I was looking for. So I don't know how I'm going to feel about the exact translation, but I was showing you guys, I think I was showing you guys this last week. So this is the interlinear Bible that I ordered, and it is like the Hebrew text next to the English translation. But the problem with this, this is great because you get to scan the Hebrew letters and it has the strong numbers. And it has the English translation right underneath the Hebrew letters, but it doesn't have the phonetic Hebrew words spelled out in English letters. So if you are wanting to read aloud in Hebrew and you don't read Hebrew letters, you can't do that with the interlinear Hebrew and Greek. The Old Testament and basically the Tanakh is in Hebrew, and the New Testament is in Greek. And so all of that is here, but I wanted to be able to read the Hebrew aloud because it's actually Aramaic. And Aramaic is a language that the angels and the devil and demons don't understand. And so it's a language that you can speak directly to God. So it's very powerful and very effective to speak and read aloud the Hebrew text from the Bible, or the Zohar. And so this is pretty crazy. I went to visit my dad. He was in the hospital with a kidney thing this week. And he's home now. He's all right. He's on the mend. But I took Psalm 30. And so in my shorts, I've been doing a series where I'm reading you guys the Psalms, but I'm telling you which Psalm is for what. So there's this book here, Secrets of the Psalms. And it's a very thin little book, but basically it explains each psalm is intended for a specific purpose. You can use it to pray for specific things. And so I took the Psalm 30 to him and prayed over him. And this is the Psalm to protect you from all evil occurrences. It just so happens this is also the Psalm that we sing on Hanukkah every night, one of the Psalms that we sing. And I've always been a big fan of it. I've always loved the Hanukkah songs. Sometimes I just read them through the year when I need, a little bold pick-me-up. But I was reading this psalm, and with the Kabbalah Center, they're really good about having translations where you have the Hebrew letters all spelt, and then they have the Hebrew words phonetically spelt out with English letters underneath, so you can read the words and pronounce them out loud. And then it has the English underneath so you can translate what it says. So I was reading to him the psalm. I read it to him in English first. So I laid hands on him and prayed, and I anointed him with some olive oil and lily of the valley that I have from Israel. And I read the psalm over him, And then I read it in Hebrew, and he started having muscle spasms. Like, it was crazy. So they're very powerful. And so the angels don't understand the Hebrew or the Aramaic language. They don't speak it. It's in a human language spoken directly to God. It's a divine, holy language. And so basically, when we pray, typically the angels intercept our prayers, and they're the messengers that take our prayers to the upper realms. Well, when you pray and you don't direct your prayer directly to Jesus Christ or directly to God, and you're just praying, unless you have a higher consciousness, angels will intercept your prayers, and they're kind of like accountants, and they're like, okay, well, what is this person's track record? Like, they'll look at your scales, your cosmic scales, right? And does this person merit this kind of blessing? Do they still need to go through their process? So they really evaluate and look at the negativity that you've done and created. And they kind of like answer your prayer or deliver it based on what the conclusion they come to. So when you pray in Aramaic, though, you bypass their audit and you get straight up to the upper realms. So that's one of the reasons, the deep secrets, why it's very powerful to pray in Aramaic. Not only was it the language of Jesus, but it is also the secret language that humans have that angels and Satan and demons don't understand. Sure. Okay, let's get into the passage. So basically, I will read you guys. So my story was that I found on Amazon. I did participate in the boycott, and I've been avoiding Amazon. But then I wanted to order these Bibles, and so I was like, "Well, the boycott we're done with the Amazon blackout for now. We're mostly avoiding." So I was like, I gave myself permission to order these Bibles, and so they have the first 5 books of the Torah in one volume, and then Kings and the Prophets and the Tehillim, which are the Psalms, and all in separate volumes. And so you can see there's 3 lines. And so you're looking for an interlinear with 3 lines with the phonetic Hebrew to English is what you're going to be looking for if you look for this version of the Bible, where you can read the Hebrew letters. You can scan those. Those are good for your soul to scan. And then you can read the Hebrew words out, and then you can read the English underneath. And I also think this is interesting because I want to get like a Hebrew to English dictionary so that I can look up the origins and the deeper meanings of each of some of the key words. Because this is what gets lost in translation. And so the Hebrew words have deep meaning, they have deep layered meaning, and they have symbolism attached to them. And they also have their own unique numerical value. And so each letter in the Hebrew language has a numerical value, and the collective word has its own numerical value. And so these numbers are meaningful and symbolic, and then they reference other things in the Bible as well. So when Abram became Abraham, God added that H in his name because it changed the numerical value of his name to a more divine number. And I can't remember what the gematria comes to when you add his letters, but it was significant. So that is why sometimes in the Bible you have God changing people's names. They're very significant. Okay. So tonight we have been reading from the Gospel of Philip for some time. These were a collection of writings found with little context. And so there are these like cryptic portions of text that are very metaphysical and esoteric and symbolic, and they're meant to be meditated on and mulled over. But they're not like long drawn out like books of the Bible, like Gospels, right? Where you have these scenes and people are talking to one another. These are very conceptual and abstract. So last week we read the passage Creation Through a Mistake. And what I'll do is I'll read you guys the passage a couple of times, and then we'll go in and unpack the meaning. But bear in mind, pause now, go watch last week's full explanation of the passage, because we're not going to go into much depth on that. I'm just going to bring in those final thoughts that I was getting from the passage. All right, let us begin. Creation through a mistake. The world came into being through a mistake. The Creator wanted to make it incorruptible and immortal, but he failed and did not get what he hoped for. For the world is not incorruptible, and the Creator of the world is not incorruptible. Things are not incorruptible, but offspring are. Nothing can receive incorruptibility unless it is an offspring. And whatever cannot receive certainly cannot give. All right, let's read that again. The world came into being through a mistake. The Creator wanted to make it incorruptible and immortal, but he failed and did not get what he hoped for. For the world is not incorruptible, and the Creator of the world is not incorruptible. Things are not incorruptible, but offspring are. Nothing can receive incorruptibility unless it is an offspring. And whatever cannot receive certainly cannot give. Okay, so the world came into being through a mistake. So we are kind of going to touch on some of the mythology around the creation story and Adam and Eve really quick. So we recognize this from last week, right? And all the other weeks before, we always have this out. This is the tree of life. And so these are the dimensions of consciousness as they become more crystallized and become more fleshed out. And we finally get to the last dimension here, the 10th dimension, which is Malchut. And this is the material realm. The very top, the first dimension here, is Keter. This is the crown. This is the primordial point where the light bursts through into beingness from the negative veils of non-existence. So, in this state, in Keter, the light is in its purest form, and everything is whole and one and undefinable and abstract, and everything is included and everything is within that light. It's the white light that has all the other colors in it, and it has all of creation. Think of the Big Bang, right? That came from the singularity. That is the scientific description and the almost like the parable or the physical manifestation of like the mirror image of the greater, bigger, original version of this. But by the time we get to the Big Bang, we're down here, right? This is where the physical, the non-physical, and the physical meet. But before this, very abstract. All of these other dimensions, these are called Sphirot, and these are the attributes of God. They are the Godhead, and they are also the virtues that make up the human soul. And when they're out of balance, they're in vice, and then when they're in balance, they're in virtue. And so these are also the governing forces of reality, and these are the building blocks of reality. So the pure white light comes through, and from up here, this upper triangle, this is the supernal triangle, the supernal triad. And these are basically the origin elements of everything that is. This is the central column, which is neutral. This is the left-hand column, which is probably reversed when you're seeing it, but this is the feminine column. This is the column of judgment. This is the right-hand column. This is the masculine column of mercy. So think of electricity. You've got your neutral, you've got your grounding here. You have your positive charge and your negative charge. So what we want is everything working in balance and harmony to bring this into the stability of the central column, the neutral column. And so in this column is when you rise in consciousness. These columns are more of the experiences that bring us to that elevation of consciousness. So creation starts here in Keter as pure light, and it goes to first to the masculine, and the essence of the divine masculine, the supernal masculine, is raw dynamism. This is unadulterated potential. It's energy, it's fire, but it has no form. It's just completely erratic. Think about like the atom being split and all that energy just being like this static, this wild, shapeless, formless, boundaryless, boundless static that's just uncontained, unadulterated, unfiltered energy. It needs the supernal feminine, which is restriction, silence, boundary, border, limitation. That gives it shape, right? And then as the light travels down through the tree, it becomes less abstract and more fleshed out, more crystallized, more focused. And so you have these other attributes that make up the light. And when you think about having an idea and bringing it into fruition, it starts as like this sort of like a hunch, like a feeling of excitement, a feeling a little bit inspired. I think we're getting an idea. And then it becomes fleshed out and crystallized enough where you can almost visualize the idea. Until you can visualize the idea, you can't really articulate the idea, right? And so the articulation, the speaking of the idea, is the first physicalization of the idea, right? And then it becomes manifest maybe in material, physical form. Okay, so when God created, so before in the beginning moment, when God created the heavens and the earth, the essence of the light was in this this unmanifest state, and there are 3 veils of negative existence. And so the endless is here. It's like this sea of endless light. And then there are 2 more lesser formed, there's like the nothing and like the absolute. So it's a very abstract thought to start thinking deeply on the nothing and the absolute. But here you have the endless light, right? And so the endless light was the light of the Creator before there was a vessel, before there was anything to share with, before there was a space to create in. It was all one. It was all unified. There was nothing separate. It was completely whole. All of the potential of existence ever was in the endless light. And so I like to imagine that the endless light started stirring and feeling antsy and feeling the excitement of an idea coming, and the endless light wanted to be. And it had this, it pulled itself together enough to become conscious and sentient and want to think and want to have a mind and a thought and to share. And so if the light starts to think I am, then who is me? I am, but is there another, right? If I am, then if I'm me, then does that imply there's another, right? So the light wanted to share, wanted to create, but there was nothing to pour into. Imagine just like having all of this water and wanting to pour it into a cup, but there's no cup, so it just like spills out, right? So light needed vessel. And so light sort of became, that's when the moment of separation and dualism happened, because in order to share, there has to be another, right? So light created the vessel that would ultimately contain all of the upper realms, which is the 99% of reality. This is the non-physical, the intrinsic realm that we don't see. And then there is the 1% here that we do see. And this is the multiverse, right? This is the universe. This is the multiverse. This is anything that is materialized and physicalized. So that is when light separated and created vessel in order for this whole process to begin. The creation of all the upper realms and all the mysteries and then the kingdoms, and then all of a sudden we have the physical realm down here. So what happens next? So when God started the, when we read in Genesis chapter 1 and we read about the separation of the firmament and the creation of the Garden of Eden and this paradise, what is paradise? It's a walled garden, right? We have all of that created, but it's in this non-physical space here. This Spirat Yesod is the last stop before materialization. This is the astral realm where we have thought forms that come from our imagination and that we create with our imagination. This is where souls come and go from this world. This is where all blessings flow through to us. This is where the dream state happens, when you feel like you have these dreams where you talk to somebody in your dream and you're like, oh my God, like they had the same dream and we met up. And like there are indigenous people who are excellent at astral projecting. When you astral project, when you hear about the PSYOPs and remote viewing, the PSYOPs sect of the military, and they do the remote viewing. This is the realm that they traverse. It is like a dimension in and of itself. So this is where spirits are. This is where the souls come from. There's like this realm here of like this internetwork of all of these entities. And so before we come to earth, this is where we are in the soul, the form of our soul, in this kind of like limbo. Well, the Garden of Eden was first created here. And that is where Adam and Eve first were before they ate of the tree and fell. Now, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is one tree in the garden. The other tree was the tree of life. Now, this is the two categories of consciousness that we can find ourselves in at any given time. When we are in the tree of life consciousness, we are in flow, we are in fulfillment, we are in trust and surrender, and we are in union with God. We're connected, we're happy, we're in joy, and we are in faith and in belief. And that's when we can just like, everything's in flow, we can manifest blessings so easily, and there's not suffering when we're in that state. But when we go into the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that's when our ego starts asking like all these questions that make us feel insecure and uncertain, and we get confused, and there's pain and there's suffering and there's fear and lack and doubt. And that is when we're in the tree of knowledge of good and evil consciousness. So when we ate of the fruit, before we ate of the fruit, we were always in the tree of life consciousness. Everything was perfect and whole, and there was no suffering, there was no sickness, there was no death in the tree of life consciousness. And that's what God originally intended. He wanted us to be these immortal, perfect spirits who would, be with him in complete oneness and like have no suffering, no sadness. Everything is perfect all the time in this beautiful garden, in this paradise. Well, when Adam and Eve ate of the fruit, they felt shame. And that was the introduction of their ego, because after they had knowledge of good and evil, they knew that was when dualism was introduced, and they became separate from the creator. A veil was drawn because their ego and their confusion and they're asking questions, like they couldn't, like when they were in the perfect state, they could sense if something wasn't, if something was poisonous, or they knew that if like they weren't confused about what was good and what was bad. It's like they could know what they could eat, and they weren't confused, and they knew it was good for them, and they knew it was bad, and there was no confusion. But once they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that introduced confusion, and they couldn't tell good from bad as easily as they used to be able to. They used to have this like 100% clarity discernment, and that clouded it, that pulled a veil across it, because the ego starts messing things up and starts muddying the water and starts getting everyone confused. I mean, look at us now. Look at today. Look at half of the population can tell, okay, this is definitely wrong, and this is definitely right, and this is Jesus's real message, and this is like radicalism getting everything twisted for someone else's agenda. Now, some of us can see that very clearly, but then others can't, right? And it's like they're confused. They're confused about what's good and what's bad and what's right and what's wrong. Some of them are. Some of them are not confused, and they have a sinister agenda. But other people are, they can't tell. They're confused. They're like, well, the Revelation said that, you know, the Antichrist would come and tell people what was good was bad and what bad was good, and the real person would be good, and, you know. So they're confused. And so this is the state that happened when we ate of the tree. Now, when we ate of the tree, we felt shame about our wrongdoing. And when I say our, it's because we were all collective souls that came from the original soul of Adam. And then Eve came from Adam. And then all of us have splintered off from there, from those original seed souls. So when it says, let's go back to the passage. The world came into being through a mistake. The Creator wanted to make it incorruptible and immortal, but he failed and did not get what he hoped for. So to me, when I'm reading this passage, I'm like, okay, so what is the most basic way to think of corruptible versus incorruptible? What is something that's been corrupted? Something that's been corrupted has been changed from its original form, right? And so when it says, the world is not incorruptible and the Creator of the world is not incorruptible. Well, the Creator changed from Creator's original form. Creator's original form was the endless light, and there was no vessel. It was light, endless light, and that's it. But the Creator split himself, masculine and feminine, and the vessel became the feminine receiver of the light of the Creator. So the Creator split himself into two. Think about the splitting of the atoms in the early stages of creation. The story, this knowledge, this truth is repeated over and over and over again. Everywhere you look at in nature, everywhere in the cycles of the seasons, the sun, the solstices, the way that like the bird of paradise can fan its, like everything, like the Fibonacci sequence everywhere, like everything in the cosmos tells the original truth of the cosmos. And so you see it mirrored and metaphored everywhere you look in nature. That's why nature is always teaching us so many things, so profound. So that's why like the indigenous and pagan and the tribal people of the world, like their myths, it's like they all understand, and like the paganism, it follows like the solstices and everything. It's still telling the story of the Christ. It's still announcing the coming of the Christ, because the Christ, the Son, it's always evident, right? It's being expressed through every creation of nature. So it's this truth that's profound, and it permeates all of reality. So we just, kind of like tune into that radio station, and it's like we perceive it everywhere we see it, this truth. It's so cosmically true that it's true. It tells itself everywhere. This truth proclaims itself everywhere. So corruptible. So the world came into being through a mistake. The Creator wanted it to be incorruptible and immortal, but he failed and did not get what he hoped for. The world is not incorruptible because the world started as this perfect dream world, right? That wasn't physical. There was no shelf life. There was no expiration date. But when Adam and Eve felt shame, they felt, they became dense, and they weren't light beings anymore. They took on this density and this heaviness, and they fell. And when it says God created them clothing of skins, wasn't just like wild caveman outfits. It was this clothing of skin, this flesh suit that we wear. So that's what created the fall. And then the world down here was actually created. It was like, it just appeared, like it physicalized, like everything was all beautiful and unchanging. And then all of a sudden it got dense and fell, and we fell down into this material realm. Everything became physicalized, including Adam and Eve. So the world was corruptible. So it started off as pure, immortal, no expiration date. Nothing had a carbon breakdown or whatever that happens, you know. The human beings, they started as these creations, these perfect light beings. But then after the fall, they fell and they changed from what their original form was, and they became flesh. They became physical, capable and vulnerable to sickness and to illness and to injury and to pain and to aging and death, right? We became mortal. We were immortal, now we're mortal. So we have God that changed his original form to create the creation. Then we have the light beings that we used to be, the immortal souls that became different creatures, right? So then it goes on to say, for the world is not incorruptible, and the creator of the world is not incorruptible. Things are not incorruptible, but offspring are. So Adam and Eve were creations of God, but then they had offspring, and those offspring were always mortal human beings. So after that, they didn't change. They weren't corruptible. They didn't change forms from immortal to mortals. They were born mortals. So that's why it says offspring are not corruptible, because we are what we are. We are mortal until we die. Unless you are so ascended that you ascend and you don't die, but you just get to sort of like walk out of the planet. And that only happened to like 2 people, Enoch and Elijah, I think. And then Jesus even died, but he was resurrected, and then he ascended after that. Okay, so things are not incorruptible, but offspring are. Nothing can receive incorruptibility unless it is an offspring. So it's like, what is born, what is the child of something? Nothing can be incorruptible unless it is the offspring of something. Unless you're born of the creature, then you're not, then you are what you are. You're not a changeable creation. Not that we can't change, but you know what I mean? You don't become like a whole nother creature thing. The closest thing I can think of that starts off as one thing that becomes another is a caterpillar that becomes a butterfly. But isn't that the universal symbol of transformation and metamorphosis? Okay, so nothing can receive incorruptibility unless it is an offspring or a child. That has a footnote. Let's see what it says. It says 103. What does that say? That's about the sacrament. Oh no, that's 105, sorry. Or a child. Okay, so it says offspring or a child. Okay. So, and whatever cannot receive certainly cannot give. Now, last week we talked about all of the light overflowing in these dimensions and going from one spherot to the next. And so every one of them gives and every one of them receives. But when you get to Malchut, it only receives. And so our fleshly nature only wants to receive. It only wants to take. But we have to rise above that nature so that we learn how to share. Now, when we ascend in consciousness, we go back up the tree. So it's like as we ascend, it's like we are returning and we are being reabsorbed back into the oneness. But in order to to ascend and go back up, we have to give of ourselves. We have to sacrifice our lower nature. And how do we do that? We die to our ego, we die to our selfishness, we die to our lusts, we die to our animal carnalism, right? Our carnal animal mind. And when we can overcome our carnal animal mind, that is when we can transcend into enlightened state and become one once more with our divine mind. So whatever cannot receive certainly cannot give. So if we cannot receive divine inspiration, then we have nothing to share. If we can't receive that vitality and that energy, then we have nothing to give the world. If we can't receive that enlightenment and that understanding, then we have nothing to share. We don't have any wisdom to give, right? Now, this week has been, in our readings, there's been this constant repetitive theme of sitting in meditation. And so one who cannot receive cannot give. So how do we become one with this higher mind once more, which the divine mind is built into us? The Christ told us that we have the Christ in us, that we have to activate, that we have to tap into. So, and we do that by becoming more like Jesus, the Christ, and adopting that consciousness. And as we transcend, this is the Christ center here. This is the level that Buddha reached in consciousness, which is higher than the human level of consciousness, the carnal mind. So Buddha got to here like an angelic state, like a higher state. But then even beyond this was Christ consciousness in Tiferet. Now, once you go above Tiferet, this is an unmanifest state here. This is not necessarily a dimension of consciousness, but once you rise above the state of the Christ, you start to lose your individuality and you become reabsorbed back into the all. So this is the highest that a human soul can go and maintain their individual personality before they are absorbed into the upper realms, into the all, into the oneness of God. So that's the idea, though, is that, and don't worry, we're not getting there. Like, it is not going to happen. So the idea is that we try to transcend our carnal mind on earth. And so one way that we are able to tap into that is by decalcifying our pineal gland, and it excretes this chemical referred to as the sacred secretion. I can't remember the scientific name of this chemical, but it flows down through our spine and it awakens and activates our chakras. And so our aura and our super consciousness gets activated and we become superpower, like we have superpowers. We can heal ourselves and we experience miracles. And that's when Jesus was doing the miracles on earth. He was accessing that higher level of consciousness and he was in that flow. And so he could perform miracles and healings and all kinds of things that defied what we consider to be scientifically possible, right? He went beyond that into the miraculous realm. And so in order for us to do that, in order for us to access these higher levels of consciousness, we need to activate those parts of our brain, those parts of our higher mind. And so the way that we do that is to sit in meditation and breathe. But that takes sitting in stillness, the restriction of the supernal feminine, which is difficult, right? It's difficult to sit down and be still on a regular basis for long enough and focus on your breath and empty your mind and get into that big, vast expanse inside of us. That then, through that silence and that expanse, that is when we can tap into that voice of the Holy Spirit. That's when we start activating that higher mind. And so if you cannot receive, which when you are sitting in that stillness, in that divine feminine, in that supernal feminine, that is the feminine receives, right? And so it takes that stillness and that openness and that quiet in order to receive the light of the Creator. But if we can't receive the light of the Creator, we can't give the light of the Creator. So that inspiration comes through our ability to quiet the internal noise. And we have to be able to separate ourself from ourself and be the observer of our thoughts, so that we can distinguish, okay, what is my ego mind thinking right now, and what is my higher mind thinking right now? And by doing that, by sitting in that stillness, we're able to take a step back and observe our thoughts and observe ourselves as ourselves from the observer's point of view. And then we can take an even further step back and observe the observer observing ourselves. And then it becomes very abstract, and you're like, oh, wow, now I'm an observer who's observing the observer who's observing myself. And it gets pretty wild. But in order to do that, it takes restriction, the feminine restriction. Now over here we have that masculine dynamism. That's all this energy where we want to do and we want to give and we want to be expressing our outward physicality. I want to run around. I want to take a walk. I want to take a walk and call that my meditation. I get it. But it's different when you sit in the restriction of stillness and quiet and silence, and you listen and you open yourself up and you sit and you let your whole soul get quiet and still. And that's when the voice comes through, and that's when you can receive understanding and insight and discernment. And see, the thing is that all of the secrets of the Bible, all the secrets of the universe, the Akashic records, the cosmic truth, the cosmic wisdom, we're made of it. It's within every fiber of our being. But in order to tap into that, we have to regularly be able to quiet the carnal mind, sit in stillness, and be able to separate our thoughts from the divine inspiration coming in. We have to be able to discern between the two of those. But once we can, it's like all of a sudden this knowledge starts boiling up inside of us, and it's like we understand things and we know things. That is how I can sit here and pick out a random passage and then start getting insight and inspiration and wisdom about what I'm reading, because I'm not a theologian. I've never even read the Bible all the way through. But so many times the voice inside of me will say, go open the Bible, and it'll give me the specific thing to go look up, and there it is, like exactly what I needed for that moment. And it's not like I'm in this state all the time, but it does happen more often when you nurture it. Before I was even, at this point in my state of, advanced studies and spirituality and spiritual awareness, before I started studying Kabbalah, because a lot of things, the Hebrew Kabbalah studies the Bible at the deepest level, the spiritual deep wisdom secrets. And so before that, even just as a kid, a child, I would love laying out in the yard at night and looking up at the stars and space, and I would obsess over creation and cosmology. And I didn't even know, I wasn't aware of what that was, but it was like I could tap into these questions and this inquisitiveness, and this somehow like the revelations would come to me. Like children are so much closer to that original identity, that they don't have all the veils of conditioning and fear and pain and sorrow and insecurity and all of the hangups that the ego gives us, right? So that's why they're so pure, and they still have that memory that comes through. And then throughout my life, throughout my adolescence and throughout my teenage years and throughout my college years, people always knew me as like the weird one that always had these like deep thoughts and like deep insights about things. And I don't know where it came from, but it was because I was able to access that realm of understanding and wisdom. Now, this was a particular gift to me where I was wide open, which came with its own downsides. I could see things like in a way that you didn't, like clairvoyant seeing things, where I was able to perceive like entities and stuff like that, which were very scary. And so eventually I kind of drew the veil so it wasn't so present for me all the time. But you and anyone else can develop these gifts, but it takes a desire. It takes discipline. It takes spending your time doing that and really opening yourself up and allowing for your own ego to get out of the way. And sometimes I think I've been better at it because I don't have a lot of doubt. I don't have a lot of questions like, well, if it's this, that doesn't make sense. Like I'm able to be like, okay, like I believe in miracles. I believe in, the magic of things beyond what we can see. And so things never had to necessarily make perfect sense to me. And so when you get that part of your mind out of the way, you're not at least fighting that battle, right? That gets a lot of the energy that you're wasting. That takes, a lot of your energy away from just like receiving the information and understanding, so whatever cannot receive cannot give. So if you're receiving this insight, but you're questioning and you're arguing with it and you're fighting it and you're like, well, that doesn't make sense, then you're not really receiving it. You can't give it either. So I think that is pretty much everything I wanted to cover in this passage. So let's read this one more time and then we'll be out. Look, 45 minutes on the dot. Creation through a mistake. The world came into being through a mistake. The Creator wanted to make it incorruptible and immortal, but he failed and did not get what he hoped for. For the world is not incorruptible, and the Creator of the world is not incorruptible. Things are not incorruptible, but offspring are. Nothing can receive incorruptibility unless it is an offspring. And whatever cannot receive certainly cannot give. So if you go back, watch last week's part 1, I'll have to go in and edit the title to call it part 1. But if you see creation through a mistake, that's what I'm talking about. I also go into the cosmology and myth of the alphabet. Each letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the alphabet, has its own unique energy signature and personality, and they are the building blocks of the universe. And so in the beginning, in the creation, the Creator would communicate and talk to the letters, and they would talk to the Creator. And so most of the letters have a positive energy, but there are a few of the letters that have very negative energy. And those are the letters that tried to tell the Creator, you are going to regret creating human beings, and you're really going to regret giving them free will, because they will disappoint you and they won't do what you hope, and you're going to be pissed and bring down your wrath. And so God was like, no, I am, if not long suffering, I can be patient with these people. And then there were angels that also were like, no, they're right. Look, you've got all this perfect, beautiful nature. You've got the mountains, you've got these waterfalls. They're going to ruin it, and you're going to regret this. And God was like, I'm warning you. You all need to chill. And they were like, no, I don't want to chill. I want to clap back, and I want to tell you. And so then they were assigned to the negative side as punishment for trying to prevent us from being created and from being given free will. So you should always respect someone else's free will, because that was the ultimate, most important detail for the Creator. And you notice that Jesus never pushes himself or his ways or his consciousness on anyone. He respects free will. If somebody doesn't want a healing, he won't heal them. And so he even tells his disciples, and they go out, on their missions, if they don't receive you, then leave and shake the dust from your feet, meaning get the hell out and don't push. Respect people's free will. It's their free will choice. So that is all for tonight. I'm going to read this one more time, because it's a nice way to end it. The world came into being through a mistake. The Creator wanted to make it incorruptible and immortal, but he failed and did not get what he hoped for. For the world is not incorruptible, and the Creator of the world is not incorruptible. Things are not incorruptible, but offspring are. Nothing can receive incorruptibility unless it is an offspring. And whatever cannot receive certainly cannot give. And that is all for tonight. And we will be back tomorrow for our weekly energy oracle forecast. So you're probably watching this on Sunday morning. I make that on Sunday night. Depending on how late I have to work, then that's when the video goes up. So you can either catch it late tomorrow night on Sunday night, or you can tune in early Monday morning. All right, you all. I hope you have a lovely rest of your, whenever this is you're watching, and peace be with you.